Hello, welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. I'm David Wheatley, and we're here to talk all things leadership. My guest this week is my colleague and returning guest, Corey Fernandez. Welcome, Corey.
Thank you, David. Great to see you as always.
Yep, and I love the wall in your background, and I keep asking him to tell some jokes because it looks like the standard background for a comedian in a plain wall. So
I'm your resident comedian.
We'll maybe get some jokes later on. But we're here to have a conversation about training today, and I want to pose the proposition that most training doesn't work, which is kind of interesting coming from somebody that's run a company that does training for so long. But I'm putting that out there that most training is ineffective and a poor investment on people's resources. What do you think of that, Corey?
Yeah, I think it just depends on what we're trying to accomplish, right? I think if you're trying to use training to establish a common language or paint a picture of what great looks like, and you do that in one day, one shot, you've probably achieved your goal. If your goal is to really challenge people's thinking and drive new behaviors so that those behaviors shift results, shift performance, shift outcomes, and you're only doing it one shot, one day at a time, then you're probably wasting your money.
Yeah, as my wife would say, one shot, one opportunity, which I think is a line from 8 Mile, but we won't go too far. Yeah, so if it's a one-off, it has its value if it's about alignment around some things, but if it's about behavior change, then that one-off training can get people excited, but there's very limited impact on what they do when they return back to work.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So then that gets us to relook at some of our training and say, okay, what if we stopped thinking about delivering training and started thinking about delivering behavior change? And if you start to think about that, what are some of the components that make that more successful?
Yeah, I think anytime we've learned a new skill or where we've challenged, ourselves to step up and do something differently, it's a process. It happens over time. In leadership, work and leadership development, it often happens over weeks, months, years. And so I think first and foremost, we need to recognize if we are going to shift behavior, if we're truly trying to help somebody move from where they're performing today and shift to a different level of performance, a different level of impact, it starts with a process. It starts with the gift of time and putting it in motion.
So that describe the process a little bit more, because we're talking about one form of training, which is an event, and another form, which is a process. And the event maybe gets alignment, but limited behavior change. The process gets both potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in a lot of ways, there is an event, perhaps that happens in a period of time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 4 hours. And that sets the stage for what great looks like. That sets the bar for where we want to be. And it gives people a breakdown of the thinking, behavior, skills that they need to aspire to. And then within what we're talking about within that event, you often are giving people a chance to practice so that they're building some muscle memory kind of real time, in that safe environment, that safe setting. And then as you wind down the clock on that event, you look at then the next 30 days or 45 days or 60 days going forward as a continued series of events to actually put that picture to work, to push that behavior to work in the real context of what they're doing, right, in the real context of their actual team, so that they are figuring out a way to build momentum, build some wins, learn on the job, and then come back into another safe setting, another kind of training environment where they can continue the coaching and learning in terms of what worked well, what maybe got a little off balance, and how they can continue to refine that thinking and behavior over time.
So we have an event, but then after the event, we spend time before we depart making sure that there's a commitment to application. That immediately, what's the piece you're going to take back to work? And then we have things that make that sticky or stickier in the workplace before we come back together again at some point to see how we did in making it stick. And the more frequent we can come back together, then the more likely it is to have a longevity, a tail to it that makes it stickier.
And I think together is a really important word not to lose sight of, because, together with a group of peers, people that we're experiencing, similar challenges with people that we start to trust and can open up with. That's where learning happens. When we're surrounded by people that we trust, that we can open up with a bit, where we can learn together and realize that we're not alone. That's another part of the kind of experience where, we move people along over time through a process with peers where they can all kind of share and contribute and learn together in a safe way. And that's really what ultimately helps people stretch and grow and learn together.
So if I just recap that so far, it's not a one-off event. It is highly applicable back to work, and we make sure that there's that step that focuses it back to work, and it's cohort driven, so that you have a team of people, not just the facilitator or the trainer there, but you have a cohort of people who are going through the same experience and engaging in the same application as you are.
Yeah, that's right.
So those things help make give the increased chance of behavior change. And then you also we talk about, we're going to come back in, say, 30 days. And the first thing we're going to look at is, what was your experience of the application, and what worked, what didn't, what was the challenge, and talk about that as a cohort so we can learn from each other's experience at the same time.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So if we just did that, that's a step up. But then this integration back to work, how can we make sure that what they're learning is really connected to what their boss needs them to be learning?
Yeah, I think where the kind of the way that you can frame any type of training in this one. So and really looking at this process well is from day one, ask people to define what results are most important to them. What results do you need to achieve over the next 6 months, 12 months? What relationships are most critical to achieving those results? And then ultimately, as you start to acquire new skill sets or new pictures of what great looks like, how do you then apply that to those relationships and ultimately in the pursuit of those results? So you're building kind of a scaffolding, right? That it's not just skill building for the sake of skill building. It's skill building or skill development to improve those relationships to then achieve better results in the workplace,
Mhm.
and constantly connecting the dots back to those relationships, back to those results. So it's strategic in what we're doing and how we're applying our time and how we're shifting our behavior, and not just skill development for the sake of skill development.
So one example that we try and do is, if we get somebody signed up for a training program, we want their boss to be engaged as well. So
Yep.
not necessarily be part of the training, but we want them to know that this individual signed up. We want them to be engaged in the conversation. We want them to know what's coming out of the training, so that they're armed with questions to ask, to make sure that when they get back to work on the following day or 2 days later or the following week, that the boss is saying, so how did the training go? What are you going to apply? How's this piece of it going to work for us? And so it's an educated set of questions that really say this is important to bring back to work, and can start the dialogue of application in the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. I was having this conversation around the important role that the boss, the manager plays in this type of process, and it was just happening this morning with a group that I was working with, and one of the peers in the room was just talking about how valuable that relationship is, because the boss actually provides a great amount of air cover
Mhm.
when she's trying to have a 4-hour commitment every 30 days to invest in this work for herself, for her team, for her organization. Her boss makes sure that that is available and she can actually do that work uninterrupted, because her work is in high demand, her role is in high demand, and she really needs to be on the job, on the team quite a bit. So her boss provides that air cover. And then when they do come back together after each training event, they're able to build a common understanding in terms of what she's applying back to their team, what she's applying back on the job, and get support from her boss, and even better, informing her boss in some of the ways that they can partner together, because their boss now is able to pick up on some of those cues and some of that language and some of that skill set that they can work on together.
Yeah, we've actually had people come out of the training program as a cohort who've gone back to their boss and talked about what they're applying. And the bosses have then called us and said, what do you have for bosses? And we've been able to help them as they've been learning from their direct report. But that idea of they're going to bring something back and apply it and demonstrate that they're applying it also shows a return on investment. If
That's
the
right.
boss is giving them air cover and putting them on that program, that by executing it and having that conversation, it shows that ROI.
That's right.
So then we've got the event, we've got the commitment, we've got a follow-up event that we know is going to happen, and in our case, it happens around 30 days later. we've engaged the boss to make sure that it's sticky, we've got application to work, but then it's still easy for me to get back to work and things to drop off. So what do we do to remind people of what they should be doing?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is in the world of technology, in the world of where we spend a lot of time, checking in with our devices, our schedules, our emails, and so on. And what we've learned is where we can provide gentle nudges, where we can use kind of messaging every so often, whether it's directly from their coach, who checks in on them and sends them a next message from time to time, or whether we can actually use a platform that can automate some messages and hit inboxes every once in a while to say, hey, how you doing on this? How's your commitment coming along? Can you take a moment, a pause, just for 5 minutes to reflect on your journal or your journey? And what we use is like a digital journal. And so when that email hits, we'll challenge people to click on a very quick link. It'll open it up and it'll ask, a series of questions just to get them to reflect. Are they really following through on their commitment? How strong is their focus over the last month or last couple weeks? What are they applying? What are they struggling with? And so, they're already kind of setting the stage for some of the future conversations we can have together when they come back into that safe training environment to start working with their coach again, working with their peers again, just by having that nudge, that digital communication that plays out in between the kind of formal training events.
Right. Yeah. And the next step for us is to get that to be happening within the cohort, as well as between the facilitator and the student, to have the cohort engaged in, I tried this and it didn't work, so that there's more dialogue between those sessions. So we have this whole setup, and then we would purposely build in some redundancy, some repetition in places as well, so that it's reinforced and people keep hearing the same message. And one of the things I've heard from folks is, oh yeah, we did that Humanergy stuff last year, we don't need that anymore. And my first question to them is, are you applying it? Are you using it? And the answer is usually, well, no, not really. And it's a matter of, so let's do it again. And they say, well, why would we do it again? Well, because it obviously didn't stick. Let's apply it again, because like anything else, I don't pick up the guitar behind me and play like Eric Clapton. You need 10,000 hours of practice to get to that place. And I haven't done my 10,000 hours yet.
Not even close. Yeah. Yeah. I think the redundancy is really, really key. And so where training continue to reinforce some of that redundancy is by layering in some of the skill building over time, by again kind of having a path, a runway, where you start with the most foundational components of kind of leadership. And in our case, what we talk about, two of the foundational things that we work on early on are leadership is about a choice, and you can't get very far if you aren't effectively communicating.
Mm-hmm.
And so those choices that we're making moment by moment, our ability to communicate effectively and realize that it's a choice that we're making to do the right things that help us achieve mutual understanding or not, really plays out repeatedly. And so not only do we skill build on that early, do we challenge leaders on that early, but then as we get into future skill building around coaching and conflict resolution and delegation, those same kind of principles and concepts apply, but it changes the nature of the conversation in terms of a coaching context, in terms of a learning and growth context, because we have an issue. But it really is kind of helping that drip take place throughout the entire journey, so that they're continuing to improve and challenge themselves to work on some of that early skill development all the way throughout the program, all the way throughout the process.
Right. So it's the equivalent of, I've learned my scales and now apply it in a blues song and now apply it in a jazz song. And so I can look at the same techniques and skills and apply them in different environments.
That's right.
Yeah. I think the other thing you mentioned there is we're breaking it down into bite-size, moment by moment chunks,
Yep.
that make it as applicable. So the first thing is, it's about choice. Let's have a look at the choices you're making. Let's give you a guide as to what these look like, if they're good or not. And then let's go through some iterations of that, so that you have the opportunity to practice it in the classroom.
That's right.
And then immediately go back and can hold yourself accountable to that language as you get into the training. And then you're going to come back and we're going to talk about how it went later on.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So if you take this, the example that we've been using a lot here without saying it is our high impact leadership training, which has been going for a few years. And we last year took it completely remote, previously it being geographically based. But one of the things that we did there is say, okay, if we had a year to change the behavior of a leader, what would we do to build it? And we took a lot of these segments in, including 12 4-hour in classroom or in Zoom sessions where those events happen and the commitments happen. And then what you were calling the scaffolding, or what we sometimes called the wraparound, happening in the 30 days between each of those sessions. So by the time you get to 12 months later, not only do you have a set of tools that you've been applying and learning throughout the 12 months, you have a cohort of people who've been supporting you, helping you, and that you can lean on. You've been having lots of great conversations with the people around you at work about how you're applying it. You've probably even started teaching some of it to the folks around you because they've noticed the change in your behavior. And that's one of the things we push as well, is that don't tell them you've been doing it, demonstrate it, so that then they express an interest in what it is that you're doing differently.
Yep.
And then in 12 months, for a very reasonable amount, this isn't an advert, but in 12 months, you see a very deliberate change in the way that they're operating as a leader.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, again, just thinking about what you're truly trying to do, and if that behavior changed, if that shift in behavior, which leads to a shift in results, is what you're aiming for, it is that combination of touch points, experiences, commitment, experimenting, support, and so on that continues to build. And over 12 months' time, you absolutely are seeing a series of shifts that have led to some really significant impacts for that individual, those teams, that organization.
Mhm. And we share this not to just market our program, which is a good subtext, but is not the intention. It's a matter of, if there's so many training offerings on the cards at the moment, that make sure you're picking the ones that are changing behavior and have a structure that drives to behavior change rather than the event. Because the easy event, it's like going to a conference. People always used to compare. I could go to a conference, I get to hang out with a few people, I get to meet some folks, I probably drink too much, and all in all, I've spent $3,000 by the time I've gone there and booked a hotel and my travel. And what we're saying is, why wouldn't you spend that a part of that money in investing in a 12-month behavior change that built a cohort of people that you could lean on, who all got this common language, that you learn something new every time, and it's very applicable to the world you're working in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So before we started, you were talking about context as well, and so I wanted to close on that point. That
Yeah,
find the context.
yeah, I do think it's interesting, right? Again, this kind of goes back to the idea that you can skill build for the sake of skill building, and that feels good, and that feels important. It helps us learn, it helps us grow. But if we miss the context of why we're actually developing that skill, of why we're trying to improve in this way, um, it can have less meaning, less importance, right? And so I think we're always trying to shape conversation in these experiences, in these training settings, around what is your reality, and helping each person, whether they're from a manufacturing setting, whether they're from a tech setting, whether from financial services and otherwise, really provide idea or context around what their life really looks like in their world with their team, and then how that particular skill is meaningful for them on the job.
Hmm.
Not losing sight of the unique ways that each of these people kind of contributes in these different settings, these different industries, and so on. And by bringing those stories up, by bringing that context up, we're able to help them see the relevance, and really make sure it's being applied in a way that is specific to their teams. It ultimately helps them achieve the results they're looking for, and has an impact on the relationships that are most meaningful to them. Again, not losing sight of the context, because
Right.
that's so critical.
Which then is dependent on the facilitator or the trainer to be aware of the industry enough to be able to plug in some language that makes it come alive for those folks.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where I would just continue to, you know, whether it's the Humanergy team and how we show up for high impact leadership training and other things, other training and coaching that we provide, otherwise, or other organizations, I would just continue to look at facilitators that not only are really good at delivering, but are also are true believers and practitioners in their own life. Because I think if they're able to find meaning and value in what they're delivering, and they're able to really speak to the importance of how this has changed their life for the better, it's an authentic experience, and it's somebody who's going to help you find meaning in it as well, and not lose sight of the context and the meaning for you, right? Because they are a believer, a practitioner, not just somebody who's trying to deliver and facilitate, they really want you to get better because they know how meaningful it's been to them as well.
Hey, thanks, Corey. And just to wrap that up, if people are interested in seeing what this looks like in reality, then go to humanergy.com and check out our high impact leadership training. We have a cohort starting on the 18th of March. That's 2021. And that's open enrollment. We also take it sometimes internally to an organization where you build your own cohort internally, which can build great connections across a normal organization, and applying all the things that you and I have just talked about to ensure not just an event, but behavior change at the end of the day.
Absolutely, David. Well done.
Corey, thanks for joining me this afternoon, and take care.
Thank you. I appreciate it, David.
You've been listening to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. I'm David Wheatley, and we're brought to you by the book, What Great Teams Do Great, available now at all good bookstores. Thanks to Brian Spencer and Finkel for the music. Please share any feedback and suggestions. I'm available through humanergy.com. And go to iTunes, like, subscribe, and leave us a review so that other people can find us. In the meantime, till next time we meet, stay healthy.